You know, when we think about great leaders, we usually focus on their biggest victories, right? But what if the real test of a leader isn't how they win, but how they finish? We're about to dive into one of history's most powerful stories of succession, the final days of Moses. And his last few actions, well, they tell us everything we need to know about legacy, responsibility, and how a truly great leader paves the way for what's next.
So, as Moses' life is coming to an end, what's on his mind? It's not his own legacy, not even the fact that he won't get to step foot in the promised land himself. No, his biggest worry, his deepest fear, was that his people would be left as sheep which have no shepherd. He just could not stand the idea of them becoming leaderless and vulnerable after everything they'd been through together.
And that right there is the shepherd's final concern. I mean, just imagine this. God tells you that you will see the promised land, but you will never ever enter it. For Moses, that had to be a crushing disappointment. But he almost immediately shifts his focus away from himself and onto the future of the nation he'd spent his life building. So let's really think about that for a second. You've spent 40 years leading a nation through a brutal wilderness. You've dealt with rebellions. You've dealt with hunger, with war. Now, as you face your own end, what is the one thing that's keeping you up at night?
The answer? Chaos. Pure and simple. The terror that everything he had built, everything they had suffered for, would just unravel without a firm hand to guide them. See, his focus wasn't on his past achievements. It was all about preventing a power vacuum and making sure the nation had a stable future.
To stop that chaos before it could even start, Moses knew he had one last crucial job. He had to manage the passing of the mantle. And this wasn't just about picking some guy. It was about choosing and then publicly commissioning Israel's next leader in a way nobody could question. And the job description for this new leader? It wasn't what you probably expect. God didn't ask for the strongest warrior or the smoothest talker. The number one qualification was this: a man in whom is the Spirit. It's this incredible blend of divine guidance, real wisdom, and guts. That was the most important quality for the huge task ahead. And that man was Joshua. The handover itself was a masterclass in how to do things right. This was no backroom deal. First, you have the divine choice. Then, Joshua is brought out in front of everyone, the priest, the entire nation. And finally, Moses publicly lays his hands on him. It's a clear, formal, undeniable transfer of authority. Doing it this way, out in the open, was so important because it left zero room for doubt or division. It sent a message: we are moving forward, together. Okay, so the succession is all sorted out. You'd think Moses' work is finally done, right? Not quite. There was one last piece of unfinished business, a final, fierce command that had to be carried out before he could rest and before the people could finally claim their promise. And the command? Wow, it's really two things at once. On one hand, it's a military objective: avenge the children of Israel. This meant dealing with the Midianites, who, along with the prophet Balaam, had tricked the nation and led them into corruption. But then it gets deeply personal for Moses. The command ends with a promise of his own death. Afterwards shalt thou be gathered unto thy people. This was it, his very last act. To get this final job done, an army of 12,000 men was put together. But this number isn't just about military strength. It's hugely symbolic. By sending 1,000 soldiers from each of the 12 tribes, Moses made sure this final campaign was a unified national effort. It reinforced the very solidarity he'd worked so hard to build. And the outcome was decisive. The enemy kings were defeated, sure, but just as important, Balaam, the guy who was the source of all that spiritual corruption, was also eliminated. So this victory was about more than just a battle. It was a purification. By taking care of the spoils and cleansing the camp according to God's command, Moses wasn't just winning one last war. He was spiritually preparing his people to enter a holy land. So with all these final pieces in place, the stage was finally set. It was time for the dawn of the promised land. See, Moses didn't just fade away. He used his last days to meticulously prepare the nation for its next big chapter. He handed Joshua a people that were unified, secure, and totally ready for what was next. Just look at the transformation. It's absolute. Moses started with a nation facing uncertain leadership, a nagging final threat, and some serious spiritual baggage. And he handed it over to Joshua with a new leader firmly established, the last enemy totally removed, and the people ritually purified. He didn't just pass the torch, he cleared the entire path ahead. And that's why, in the end, His greatest legacy isn't the parting of the Red Sea or the 10 Commandments from the mountain. It was his faithfulness right to the very end. It was his deep understanding that his most important final job was simply to prepare the way for those who would come after him. It really makes you ask the question, doesn't it? What defines true success for a leader? Is it the list of victories they rack up for themselves, or is it measured by the future they secure for the people who follow them? The story of Moses' final chapter gives us a pretty clear and, I think, timeless answer.